Hello, everybody, and welcome to Safest Family on the Block, where knowledge is power. I'm your host, Jason, and joining me today is Ed Kressy. Hello, Ed.
Hello, Jason. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
So good to see you again. Some of you folks will remember a few episodes ago, Ed comes to us after winning a long battle with addiction, and he had some advice for parents of children who were going through those struggles themselves. And now Ed's got a whole brand new project going on that's just really fascinating. And I want to talk to him about that project and also some other advice in that area that he can give to folks. So, Ed, why don't we start real quick with what is Uncarcerated?
Uncarcerated. Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about Uncarcerated, Jason. We are a nonprofit. We're a 501c3 recognized by the IRS. Our mission is to build bridges to successful reentry to society following incarceration. We accomplish our mission by providing scholarships and creating and delivering programs inside correctional facilities. The programs are related to recovery from substance abuse, and we are also looking at, we're very excited that we've been officially recognized as a partner of Google, or I guess I should say a component of Google called Grow with Google. This is a project within the Google organization that, among other remarkable works, helps nonprofits like Uncarcerated provide digital skills training for career readiness to people who are affected by the justice system.
Excellent.
We're doing some other,
and that's
sorry to interrupt. We're doing some other things too.
You know.
That's kind of the bulk of it.
I think that's really important. I mean, I have a brother who he was never on the inside, but he spent 10 years on probation. And even with his record, it has created there's huge barriers to his ability to get housing, to his ability to get a job for more than minimum wage. It seems like the deck is very stacked against people who are getting out of prison. And that's after missing out on that years, decades in some cases, opportunities to advance your resume, advance your career, and all of that. And so these kinds of tools, I think, would be incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. It's very challenging for me. My criminal record was very small compared to many. I had a felony arrest, but a misdemeanor conviction, only spent a couple of months incarcerated. I had had many opportunities given to me through the course of my life, college education, had a professional resume. Still, for me, even with all those advantages, it was very challenging to successfully re-enter society following my relatively brief incarceration. And like you say, Jason, there are so many barriers. One major barrier is, of course, the stigma around incarceration. I believe, and what I've seen, is that when we can eliminate stigma, we can overcome many of the barriers to successful reentry. When we can learn to see incarcerated people for what I believe many of them are, which is a very valuable human resource here in our society in the United States, and I believe globally, even Crete, where you are, Jason. When we see incarcerated people as beacons of hope, when we see incarcerated people as having stories to tell, lessons that they've learned to share with us, when we see incarcerated people as being human beings whom, when offered a second chance or a legitimate first chance, when offered a fair chance, incarcerated people often have the ability to transform their lives, turn their lives around, and be highly productive members of society. We've seen it over and over and over again. Uncarcerated is proud to be doing some small part in light of all the remarkable work being done by many other organizations and women and men out there today.
And again, that's just so important. I feel like a lot of our institutions and unfortunately individuals are still kind of stuck in that retribution model where even after these people have paid their debt for society, they're coming out, they're wanting to turn their lives around, they still feel like it's somehow on us to punish them further. Even though, when the judge put the gavel down, he or she said, this is your punishment. And then the people get to finish that punishment, and makes it very, very difficult for people to be rehabilitated if they don't have those opportunities.
Absolutely. It's difficult. For me, we've all made mistakes. We've all made mistakes, and the temptation, at least for me and maybe for others, is to compare our mistakes, to say, well, I've never made the mistake that results in another person's losing their life, or I've never
Yeah.
made certain mistakes like incarcerated people have made. Yet I can say for myself, and I can really only speak from my own story, that the mistakes, I'll tell you a little story. When I was really sinking into the depths of methamphetamine addiction, I owned this home, beautiful home in San Francisco. I had this dog, a remarkable dog. Yet I was so deep in my meth addiction and my developing meth psychosis that I would mistreat the dog, neglect and basically abuse the dog. And one thing I would do is I would have this water gun. It sounds ridiculous, but I had one of those big water guns, and when the dog disobeyed me, I would shoot the dog with the water gun because I was angry, and I was also very fearful that if the dog didn't learn to obey me, he would run out into traffic or hurt somebody. So I shoot the dog with this water gun, and let's be honest, Jason, the dog probably thought it was a game, right? Maybe the dog thought we were playing, but Jason, there was real anger in my heart. There was real anger when I was shooting this dog with the water gun. The point is, had I not been given the advantages that society gave me, and this is only my own story, I don't mean to speak for anybody else, but I, as a white male in our society from a privileged background, relatively privileged, and again, this is only my story, the unfair advantages society gave me led to me being in a home, basically paid for by my family, shooting a beautiful dog with a water gun. Had I not been given the home, had I not been given a college education, instead of shooting a dog in a home with a water gun, I feel I would have been out on the streets shooting a rival gang member or drug dealer with a pistol. The anger, the negativity, the hatred. I mean, hatred is kind of a strong word to use when talking about my pet dog, but the anger I felt was just the same. And the mistakes I made because of the unfair advantages I got from society, that's why I was in a home with a water gun instead of out on the streets. The point is, one thing that I've learned is that if we can create these level playing fields, if we can give everyone the same opportunities, the similar opportunities as society gave me. I've worked with many, many incarcerated people. Many of the ones I've worked with, I have to say, if they've been given the same chances I've been given, they would have turned out fine. They would have turned out fine. I've worked with gang members in Pelican Bay State Prison and High Desert State Prison. I've worked with women and men incarcerated in our county jails and prisons from California, in California, Massachusetts, the state of Maine. Doesn't mean that every incarcerated person, we don't want to certainly we don't want to endorse actions taken by people like me who hurt others through our poor choices. We don't want to endorse the actions people took that resulted in them being incarcerated. But when it comes to fair opportunities, fair chances, second chances, my feeling and what I've seen, because I've been inspired by so many remarkable women and men, if we can provide these fair chances, if we can provide the second chances to the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, it makes the society that we all share a far better society.
I absolutely agree. And folks, if you've got a family member or you yourself are reentering society and could use some help, check out Uncarcerated. If you've got some donation money and think that this is a good cause, please consider Uncarcerated as part of the people that you help fulfill their missions. And I want to talk a little bit about a parental aspect of this. That we're talking safest family on the block, and safest family on the block is all about worst case scenarios and avoiding them as well as you can. I have a son who, when he was, I think, 22, committed the heinous crime of being very stupid, and then the even worse crime of being a wise ass to the police officer who found him doing something very stupid. And he spent 36 hours in jail behind that. And those were 36 of the worst hours of my life. And I think that any parent who's got a child who, whatever their age, who's either facing incarceration, currently incarcerated, or dealing with these challenges we're talking about, can use all the help they can get. And so I think maybe let's do it in chronological order. Just for parents who have a child who has been accused and is looking at entering prison or entering jail, what are some things that a parent can do at that stage to support their child and help them have as safe and as a productive a time as possible when society decides to take its bite?
It's a challenging question. I actually thought about this quite a bit before we got together today, Jason. I really I can speak from my own experience and from what I've seen. There are three things that I've seen that I believe might be helpful. And I've never been a parent. I'm not a parent, never have been, so I'm not speaking from my own experience. The first and most important thing to me is that spiritual component. Is having a form of faith, a form of spiritual practice, and looking certainly at the spirituality of incarceration. When we think about some of our greatest leaders of modern times, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, they were all incarcerated. I'm going to actually read a quote for you from Gandhi. And Gandhi, I didn't realize this until recently. Gandhi he spent about 6.5 years in prison. Gandhi wrote, I learned most when I suffered most. It was the time of the fattest harvest. While suffering lasted, it was difficult to bear, but it is now one of the richest treasures in life's memory. We have today converted the jails into heavens of refuge for liberty-loving people. They can be easily turned into abodes for attaining nirvana. These are words Gandhi spoke about incarceration. It leads to that second point, which is how to reframe the nature of incarceration. So we talked a little bit earlier about the stigma, how important it is to overcome stigma. One powerful tool we have is the tool of language. And you know, Jason, of course, being a writer and through your work, through your podcast and serving your audiences, the power of language. If we avoid using the term prisoner, we avoid using the term inmate, avoid the term convict, and instead use a term like an incarcerated person, that can be a powerful way of shifting our mind towards doing exactly what Gandhi said, or similar to what Gandhi said in his quote, as seeing incarceration as a transformative process of turning a weakness into a strength, the dark into the light, the mistakes of our past into triumphs of our future. If we can look at incarceration in a different light. So if you're the parent, and again, speaking as a person who is not the parent or never has been, perhaps if you can start to see, or you better see, incarceration as a process of transformation, as a way of using our mistakes to the benefit of others. Some of the most powerful speakers, most effective leaders, again, thinking of Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and Gandhi, they've used histories of incarceration to lead societies, turn around countries, to change the world. If they can use their incarceration to change the world, then people like me and you, Jason, and perhaps any parents listening, can learn lessons from them to transform the lives of their own incarcerated children. It's a subtle yet powerful way of reframing how we view incarceration, reducing the stigma. I don't know about you, but I myself, I've worked in the criminal justice space since 2014. I carried around a lot of stigma. I didn't realize it. And even to this day, I was still engaged in the transformative process of overcoming stigma, my own stigma, and reframing the way I myself look at incarceration. So those are two things you can do. Adopt or deepen your spiritual path. Think of the spirituality of incarceration. Number two, think about reframing incarceration itself. And number three, there's a couple of organizations I work with. Thank you for your very kind words about Uncarcerated. There's a couple other great not to call my own organization great or try to put myself up with these other organizations, but two Very two organizations I've been affiliated with are called Defy Ventures, it's a nonprofit. Defy, like defying the odds, Defy Ventures, and Hustle 2.0. Both Defy Ventures and Hustle 2.0 provide educational opportunities, correspondence-based opportunities in correctional facilities. The education relates to entrepreneurism and employment and some other things too, but the most of what Defy or much of what Defy and Hustle 2.0 offer is training in entrepreneurism and employment. Consider if unfortunately your son or your daughter is going to be incarcerated for a longer stretch of time, consider enrolling them in Defy Ventures or Hustle 2.0. And what that will do, what that might do, what we've seen happen is that not only will your daughter or son get the benefits of the education in entrepreneurism, employment, personal growth, but you'll also have a common language to speak. So rather than that, sometimes there's that elephant in the room, that unspoken barriers between us, whatever might be going on, you'll have something to focus on. You'll have an educational curriculum that your daughter or son is undertaking, and you'll have that common language, and that can open up doors of communication that might otherwise remain closed. Defy Ventures, Hustle 2.0, they do cost a little bit of money, but if that's an issue, you can contact me. Uncarcerated has a small scholarship pool, but if you reach out to me and tell me that you being the audience, if you reach out to me and mention that you listen to Jason's podcast and you're looking for an educational opportunity for your incarcerated family member, there's a potential opportunity for Uncarcerated to assist with the scholarship. So those are three things I came up with when thinking about what little I could offer to a parent who unfortunately has a child who's incarcerated.
Well, those are huge, and I'll be sure to put links to those in the show notes below for folks who need to follow that up. And I really appreciated what you said about establishing some common vocabulary and helping communication go. I think another piece that's really important is, and this is one of my parenting touchstones, about how I'm going to have feelings about my kids, but I should never let my emotions be my kids' problem. And when we communicate with our children who are in prison, especially when they're incarcerated people, and we only get that phone call every so often, we only get that visiting time every so often, they know that they screwed up and let you down and that you're sad and scared and worried. That doesn't need to be the topic of conversation in those moments that you have together. It can very much be using that common vocabulary and addressing it as you and your child against the challenges. Have that conversation be about how you can help them, how you can support them. Because as parents, that's our job, whether our kids 3 years old learning to tie their shoes or 40 years old and on their third time in prison, that's still our job, to be that steadfast ally in their pursuing being the better person that they can be. At least that's my thought.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, you make me think of the people in my family who helped me the most when I was overcoming meth addiction were the ones who supported most of what I was doing that was positive, meaning when I would go off on paths, when I would undertake paths of spirituality, of the 12 steps, of volunteering, the family members who supported me, even if sometimes the paths I took were tangential to a clear objective, or I guess a better way to say that is, even if I didn't have a clear objective, if I was going off on a path of, what springs to mind is I became an EMT. Fantastic line of work. I pursued it, not really having a clear objective as to where I wanted to take it. I thought, maybe I'll, join the fire department. It's not too late. That it would have been a great career path, the fire department. But when I was pursuing, no matter what I did, because what was true for me and what we see a lot of times is when we leave behind a life of addiction or incarceration, we have to sometimes pick up where we left off when we started on that path. Meaning for me, I was 16 years old when I started drinking heavily. I was
Mm,
7 years old when I got clean and sober. And in between the ages of 16 and 37, there were very few periods when I wasn't drinking or using drugs. And usually I was a heavy drinker, a heavy drug user. When I was 37, got clean and sober, emotionally and in many ways psychologically, I was still 16.
mm,
I was still 16. I'd accomplished things in those 21 years, but there was so much that I hadn't done that I felt I needed to explore. So there was that
mm,
the EMT training and
mm,
the many volunteer activities that I did and the exploring faith-based communities. It was all awesome.
mm,
It was all amazing. It was all positive, yet it wasn't necessarily in pursuit of what a person might
mm,
look at and say, oh, there's a clear objective for your life. The point is, when family members, well-meaning family members, said to me things like, Ed, how come you're not making more money? Ed, how come you're not, buying a Mercedes? Ed, how come you're not, how come you're not accomplishing these clear goals? The family members were well-meaning, but it was very hard for me to reconcile my own need to explore these paths, my own need to
mm,
get the 37-year-old Ed, who was really a 16-year-old Ed, to achieve that state of or to hopefully progress towards emotional maturity. The family
mm,
members who supported me, no matter what I was doing, so long it was positive, those are the family members that helped me the most. And the other thing, Jason, which you alluded to, was the idea of listening. If the family members who listened to me, even if I was off on a tangent or talking about things that might not have
mm,
in the mind of my family members made a lot of sense at the time, the ones who listened, the ones who were supportive that way, they they gave me quite a bit of help. They gave me the most help. And, the more we talk, sometimes the more we talk things out, the more we have a listening ear, the more we kind of come to the answers which
mm,
are already inside us, yet we don't have at the conscious level, because when we have a human being who supports us, who loves us, and who listens to us, the process of talking out
mm,
what's deep inside us leads us to the answers we already have. So that's kind of a long and rambling talk about what helped me the
mm,
most in terms of my family, but these were the things: the family who supported my positive activities, and the ones who listened to me.
mm. And I think you underscored an important point that positive activities aren't necessarily alpha male, hard charging, career path things. Like, because as you say, a lot of people who end up incarcerated for whatever reason, they're in some kind of state of arrested development, that they had a drug problem that kept them from growing and maturing for 15 years, or they had some kind of self-hate or a mental illness that was undiagnosed or something that prevented them from doing that work. And so they're going to have to do that work. And having patience and support for that, I think, is hugely important. A little bit of a tangent. You mentioned about EMTs and firefighters. California, not too long ago, made a really great change to their laws, where California has been using incarcerated people as wilderness firefighters, volunteers from the prisons, for a very long time. But they also had a law that you could not work as a firefighter in California if you had a felony conviction on your record. They recently changed the law that if you had accumulated a certain number of hours of wilderness firefighting as an incarcerated person volunteering, that rule no longer applied to you. And I thought that was just very smart, very humane, and very much in keeping with that, giving people that chance to make good, to come back. So good
Absolutely.
on California.
Yeah, thank you. That's I wasn't familiar with that law, and the other part of that that lies below the surface, or maybe at the surface, is that when others see when other incarcerated people see that a person with a felony conviction has become a firefighter, then they're more inspired to overcome their own challenges. It's easy, or it's tempting to throw up our hands and say, I have a felony conviction. I've got, I'm never going to become a firefighter, and let that sense of negativity pervade our other activities as well. So it helps all of society to have a law like that. If we show incarcerated people that it's possible to overcome our mistakes, it's possible to achieve things that we thought were unachievable due to the nature of our past mistakes, meaning, if we see it's possible to become a firefighter despite having a felony conviction, even if I'm incarcerated, even if firefighting is the furthest thing from my mind, it translates to what else I might want to do. We get inspired from people. We can draw. It's a great way to draw inspiration when we see others succeed. I think it's a good way to change. It's great law to change in light of how much it helps everyone in society, not just fire departments and not just incarcerated people with felony records who want to become firefighters.
Yeah, because I think the overwhelming narrative in our culture about a felon is they're looking forward to spending the rest of their lives flipping burgers and pumping gas. And if you believe that as you're getting out into the free world again, I mean, selling dope and stealing cars is going to be a lot more tempting, because that's probably more fun and certainly more profitable than slinging burgers on the midnight shift, which is what I think a lot of felons are told erroneously, that's the only option they've got.
It's what people convicted of felonies are told and what they're shown. And yeah, like you mentioned, it's about the narratives we create. There are facts and there are circumstances and there's what's outside of us, and all that's important. Yet what, in my mind, is far more important are the narratives we write. What's the narrative that I write about myself? What's the story about myself that I create? And if that story is, I have a felony conviction, yet still I can become a firefighter, yet still I can achieve, I can earn a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. If that's the narrative I write, then that's an accomplishment I'm much more likely to achieve. Whereas if I write the narrative, like you say, that, hey, the only thing that might be available is a minimum wage job, and I'd be lucky to get even that. If that's my narrative, then that's a lot more likely to be the future that I'm going to live out. It's kind of a side note. There's a very strong correlation between education and lowered recidivism. In fact, the higher one goes up in educational degrees earned, the lower recidivism, all the way up in one study. And I don't know how many people they studied, so you take it with perhaps a grain of salt, but people who earned a PhD had a 0% recidivism rate. Again, I don't know how many they studied. From the numbers I've read and from the people I've talked to, earning a bachelor's degree while incarcerated dramatically reduces a person's chances of recidivism. And of course, when we think about the fact that the average cost in the United States, and one hates to put a dollar and cents amount on a human life, but the average cost of incarceration in the United States is I'm just I should have this number at the top of mind, so I'm just going to throw it. I think it's around $40,000. I know in the state of Maine where I work, I'm pretty sure it's right around $35,000, and I think that the national average is a little bit higher. I'm not positive, so don't quote me on that. Still, when we figure that cost along with the incalculable cost to communities, to families, to human beings, to society as a whole, it makes a lot more sense to do things like the state of California did when they changed that law about felony records and firefighters, to do things that people like those at Defy Ventures and Hustle 2.0 and many remarkable women and men I've worked with in Maine and California and Massachusetts and elsewhere are doing to make opportunities like bachelor's degrees and other forms of higher education and vocational training available to incarcerated people. So there's a long, rambling approach to it, but it's great to see so many dedicated individuals like yourself, Jason. I'm sure many members of your audience who are champions of second chances for the incarcerated.
Well, we hope so. Now, I don't know the number off the top of my head either, and I read this, this is 4 or 5 years ago, I read this, and of course, college tuitions have gone up and some other costs have gone down. But at the time, the upshot of the thing I read was that There were 0 states in America where the cost of a year's tuition at a state university was not less than the cost of incarcerating somebody for a year. So we could actually send them to college for less money than it costs us to keep them in prison. I appear to have lost your audio there, Ed.
So sorry about that.
There it is.
I hit
There
the
you go.
mute button. Yeah, it's a great, the, a figure that I heard from President Obama. So I actually was not that far off with my $40,000. I did a quick Google search. In 2021, the Bureau of Prisons reports that about $44,000 was the average cost that's for a person in a federal. Well, so I think we can probably use $40,000 at least.
Yeah.
Anyway, not to get stuck,
Yeah.
but to get back to your point, President Obama, I believe, quoted a figure of $80 billion. It costs the United States on incarceration every year, $80 billion a year, which would pay the tuition of every student enrolled in a public university or college in the United States. 80 billion per year would pay the salary of every school teacher in the United States. So it's a tremendous cost. We're taxpayers, and certainly our communities and families are bearing a tremendous burden from incarceration in the United States.
And although very few of us are, senators or something like that can change these things at the policy level, as parents, we can help make sure that if our child ends up incarcerated for a while, they don't end up back in the system, by supporting them, by engaging with our faith, whatever that is, whether it's a religious aspect of it or whether it's simply that faith that you and your family are strong enough to overcome the challenges that are coming next. Just that thing, getting passionately involved in something larger than yourself, which I think all parents can understand, because that's sort of what parenting is.
Yes. Yeah. Faith, support, and certainly education.
Yeah. And then I think we've used the word narrative, and I think that's important too, because parents, they're helping their child with their narrative about, no, you're not done, you're not a loser, you've made some mistakes, you're going to recover from that, and we're going to move forward and help you as best we can to find your way. And then there's also that narrative that the parent has, because I think there's very few parents who have a child who goes to prison that aren't also thinking to themselves that their narrative changes, and there's a lot of guilt and a lot of anger and a lot of fear clouding our judgment. And although those are very natural, finding ways to healthily resolve those, whether that's speaking to a therapist, joining a support group of parents who have children who are incarcerated, because I'm sure that's a thing that exists, or whatever your path for managing your own mental health, your own narrative, your own personal narrative, so that you are as strong as you need to be to help your child be as strong as they need to be. I think that would be a very important thing. Although, again, the entirety of my experience with having a child incarcerated was exactly 36 hours. So I'm not speaking from a point of expertise, but that's what smart people I've spoken to have suggested.
Absolutely. My parents, my family, I won't say they did all the right things, because nobody's ever 100% right or 100% wrong, but my parents did many more right things than things that I could point out as, in my mind, were wrong. And my parents did a lot for me. They instilled in me a love of reading. My parents provided a college education, and my extended family provided a lot of opportunities. You would look at my life and say that my family did a lot for me, and you'd be right. Still, I ended up addicted to drugs for 20 years and incarcerated for a brief time. So, who can, it's tempting to want to blame. Something I've done a lot of it. I've done a lot of blaming myself. I've done a lot of blaming of others. It was a thing where I let myself off the hook a lot of times by blaming myself, blaming the world around me. I let myself off the hook a lot of the times doing that. Yet when I found, like you said, narratives, when I discovered that if I point the finger at someone else or something else, three fingers point right back at me, right? If I think things are, I learned that in life, things will happen. People will say and do stuff. Circumstances will transpire. Thoughts will enter my head. These things will happen. I have very little control over that. Yet I can choose to see it all as a curse, or I can choose to see it all as a blessing. Either way, I'm right. Either way, I'm right. If I choose to see what's around me as a curse, I'm right. If I choose to see it as a blessing, I'm right. The point is, I learned that I have a lot of control over the choices I make of how to view the world around me, certainly over the words I speak and the actions I take. Then the mistakes, like we were saying before, the mistakes that we've made, whether it's as a formerly addicted person like me, whether it's a parent of someone who is or has experienced incarceration, the mistakes we made, we can choose to view them as a curse and as a past that can't be changed, and that's a negative thing, or we can choose to view them as a source of strength. We can choose to see them as a blessing and an opportunity to teach others, to learn ourselves, and to transform that darkness into light. So it's up to us. We can control that narrative, and we can write that narrative. In many, at least I should only speak for myself. I've learned that I can control, and I can write the narrative for my own life.
Yeah. And one of the frustrating things about parenting, especially as our kids get older and start making mistakes, is how little we can control what they do, but we can still control our narrative, and we can give the example, because our kids don't always listen to us, but they're watching us very carefully all the time. And well, thank you, Ed, so much for coming on today, sharing your time, sharing your knowledge. Folks, do check out Uncarcerated, and we'll put all the links to that and the other resources below. Before we go, Ed, what was the smart thing I should have asked you that I didn't?
The smart thing, the smart thing I could have done was tell some more stories. I could have. I feel like there's a balance one tries to strike between the abstract and the concrete, and I feel like I threw a lot of abstract theories and some numbers out at you, very little of concrete. But
Well, we got a couple minutes left. What's a good story to close us out with?
The first one that comes to mind is the story of a guy, Ernest Kirkwood. Fantastic dude. He served not for the things he's done, because he served about 30 years in the California system. Double murder, I believe, he was tried for double murder charges. Ernest discovered Toastmasters while he was in prison. For those who don't know, Toastmasters is a public speaking and a leadership group. Ernest was released from prison. He continued using Toastmasters, but in addition to using it to improve himself, he brought Toastmasters into a women's unit of San Francisco County Jail. Ernest approached me. I was doing a lot of Toastmasters to overcome my fear of public speaking. Ernest approached me. He approached one of my colleagues and friends in Toastmasters, Stephanie Chow. He brought us in, and Ernest, along with Stephanie, and I was allowed to help, started an ongoing Toastmasters style meeting in San Francisco County Jail. This is a guy who served, I believe, just under 30 years in the California system, tried for murder, and now he is helping countless through what he created, this Toastmasters style meeting. Ernest helped a lot of people transform their lives. So stories of hope, stories of transformation are possible. No matter where your child has been, no matter what mistakes your child might have made, or that you might have made as a parent, and certainly I've made a lot of mistakes. Stories of hope and transformation are possible. Ernest Kirkwood, that story of Toastmasters, that's just one of many, many, many stories out there. We can write the narrative, we can turn our lives around, we can create light where there was darkness. We can change our own lives, and we can change the lives of others too. It happens over and over and over again. We see it every day.
And I want to thank you so much for sharing that, because I think, again, we can see it every day, but there's that other narrative that's in the media that maybe shows us the more negative outcomes as well. And just, keeping up, keeping your eye out for that hope and keeping your eye out for that light and shining it where you can, I think is another important piece of this. Well, thank you, Ed, so much. Folks, do go check out Uncarcerated. It's a fantastic program. They're doing great work, good, and they're good people doing it. Thanks for coming today, Ed. Thanks for everybody for watching. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.